This is Fit to Succeed in partnership with NordicFitnessEducation.com with host Ben Pratt. Thanks for joining us.
Understand the human being that resides in the human body you're training. A lot of people separate the human being from the human body, and that's where things get messy. I don't mean literally. That would definitely be very messy. But I mean metaphorically as well. You don't simply train a body, you train a human that's residing inside of it.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of the Fit to Succeed podcast. My name is Ben Pratt, and I'm excited today to have with me a colleague of mine from a long time ago, but he's been someone as stalwart in the fitness industry. He's worked for some big name companies such as PTA Global, N.A.S.M, and the Institute of Motion. He is the one and only Bobby Cappuccio. Bobby, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. I am the one and only Bobby Cappuccio. I mean, who would name their kid that on purpose, like twice?
Great stuff, man. No worries. It's a pleasure to have some time to talk to you today. And in particular, we're going to be discussing issues around coaching and some of the important concepts to do with coaching, particularly towards fitness professionals and those in the fitness industry. But just before we do that, you've spent a lot of years, Bobby, in the fitness industry. Do you mind just giving us a little bit of a backstory as to what inspired you to begin your journey as a personal trainer many years ago?
It wasn't inspiration, it was desperation. I was growing up in a very abusive household. And I was growing up in quite a dangerous neighborhood, and I was physically deformed. And I fell in with pretty much the wrong people, wrong kids, trying to distract myself. And I accidentally stumbled upon exercise because my doctor at Mount Sinai Hospital said, you know what, people with Tourette's, like I have, a lot of times when they exercise, we don't know why. They didn't know why yet. We do now. It seems to alleviate some of the symptoms. And I was on Haldol, which was experimental back then, but now it's antipsychotic medication. So if you're about to chew your right arm off at any minute, well, we'll put you on Haldol because, it's a crisis and you can't do any worse. Haldol has a lot of side effects that are unwanted. They said, if you can exercise, we can reduce the dosage of your medication. Well, right. I was desperate to reduce the dosage of my medication. What I also found out quite accidentally and serendipitously is that when you're lacking within, focus without. In other words, by focusing on something in its entirety in my outer world, it alleviated some of the suffering that I was going through in my inner world. And I was also able to do something that I never thought was possible before, and that is develop a plan, and through exercising not just my body, but my own volition, create changes to my physical appearance and performance, which had unintended yet very beneficial consequences in how it altered my self-concept, my self-efficacy, who I believed I was.
So you really benefited. You benefited from what I guess a lot of individuals who get into fitness benefit from, which is that feeling of increased self-confidence, happier with the way you look, happier with how you feel. Is that what you're saying?
It changed my entire life. It wasn't just that. Yes, it was that, but it encompassed yet transcended that. And I don't think I would be here today if I did not make the decision to go into the gym. And it was a frickin' nightmare. I could say frickin', right?
Sure.
Okay.
Just that's the limit though, mate. That's the limit.
All right. I'll keep it clean. PG. Or like PG-13. I don't know. Anyway, so if I had not made the decision to do that, probably wouldn't be here today. But another serendipitous thing that started to happen is for the first time in my life, people started to want to talk to me because I had some level of credibility, because I was able to produce at that age pretty significant results in my body. And kids at that age, getting into dating, sexuality, sport, it was of that age. So I was like, what exactly are you doing? Like, let's talk to Freak Show here and see if he has some answers. And what I started to realize is when I started employing resources externally towards helping others, it was an even greater reprieve from what I was going through in my own private life. So being in service of became one of my preeminent factors of my intention. So I thought, I got to do this for a living. I got to get around people and create an environment for myself where I can not only produce results for me, but what if I could be a conduit for producing results for other people, or probably even better said, helping people produce results for themselves.
All right, so you felt even more fulfilled when you were able to assist others with those same objectives.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great story, and I'm sure there'd be so many angles and elements of that story that would be a fascinating thing to get into, but we'd end up eating up all of our time. So let's just switch gears just a little bit, and let's talk a little bit more about what the concept of coaching is. So I'm going to just start us with a general question, and that is, in your opinion, Bobby, what does it mean to be a coach?
Coaching is when you give somebody the tools and resources to become more resourceful in selecting the behaviors that support the changes in the brain, that support the formation of habit, that support the changes that are most important to that individual in a given area of his or her life. That's my definition of coaching. I mean, there's a lot more around that. What?
I said, wow, there's quite a bit to that, really, that you could unravel and sort of get into. Now, the term coach, in my experience anyways, is often used in relation to somebody who manages a sports team. It's less commonly referred to in relation to fitness, as the term trainer tends to be more common. Do you think it's appropriate to refer to a personal trainer as a coach?
Well, I think when you're talking about appropriate versus inappropriate, what are you trying to accomplish? And what are the tools and mediums that you're utilizing to get there? So I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the word coach, whether it's applied to executives, whether it's applied to clients, or whether it's applied to a sports team, comes from the old stagecoach, which was basically a vehicle to take somebody from where they were to where it is they wanted to be. So define what a trainer does. And not just what does a trainer do from a trainer's perspective, what does your client think you do? Because sometimes there's a gap between what we believe we do and what our clients think we do. And that gap, if it gets too wide, could become problematic, because that means there are some assumptions about expectations. And when there are some assumptions and biases, there are inaccuracies. And when expectations don't get met, well, you know what? Clients aren't very happy, are they? So if we are a vehicle for facilitating the process by which somebody goes from where they are to where they want to be, coaching is exactly appropriate. As a matter of fact, I think coaching is more appropriate than training, because I think training is only one out of three elements of what it is that we do. All three of these elements are critical, but in the absence of any one of these elements, our methodology is incomplete, and our results are going to be disheartening. Mm-hmm. Training is where you give somebody the information on exactly what it is to do, right? So if somebody knew what to do, they would make a better choice and just do it. How's that working out for us in our society? The fitness industry started about 40 years ago. In the past 40 years, the World Health Organization says that obesity has tripled. Metabolic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, whether you look at, in this country, the CDC, or you look at the World Health Organization, has now become one of the top 10 killers. And people being sedentary actually kills more people than smoking. So if you were going to give us a report card on how effective we've been at training, when you look at the population holistically, what rating would you give us, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, that is a great question, isn't it? Because, I wonder whether, is it that the whole population has shifted that way, or do we have a greater divide between those who are engaged and those who are not? There's less middle ground now, is the way I'd see it, but I'm kind of being political in that answer.
No, because I think we're so connected that we're completely disconnected. So what we have is not a culture that creates dialogue. It's a series of conflicting and alternating monologues. So discourse is something that's disappearing. So you have a lot of polarity. You're either to 100% to one side or 100% to the other. However, whenever you take an extreme position on one side of a philosophy or another side of a philosophical, ideological argument, you're probably missing a lot of nuances that exist within the middle. Mm-hmm. So you have people that are super hardcore. I think with millennials now, we're seeing, or Generation Z, I guess, we're seeing people who are more committed as a group to exercise in communities than we ever had before. Mm-hmm. Far more so than the Generation Xers. I mean, the Generation Xers, the hardcore bodybuilders, they were a statistical anomaly, and they were kind of like a freak, and they disappeared. Now it's coming back. But you also now have people who are on the wellness side, and both have very good points and strategies, and very rarely do they meet in the middle. So let me just finish that last thought about what it is we do as trainers and why coaching is appropriate. So training is understanding what to do. Mm-hmm. Tools is what you have in order to do what you need to do. And we can wrap our head around tools. Like if you're going to have a TRX class and you walk into class and there's not a single TRX, well, most people would say, hey, that's problematic. TRX is the tool. You kind of need that to do a TRX class. So we get that. But the other element is development. And development has more to do, not with what we're doing, but who we're being, who we need to be, and who the client needs to be. And the reason why development is a lot more nuanced and sophisticated and a lot of times more difficult is because we have to relinquish control. Like Roy Sugarman says, we're not the sage on the stage. In this context, we're the guide by the side. All right. Development is more about what we draw out of somebody rather than what we put in. As a matter of fact, the Latin root of the word education translates to draw out, or in some cases, educo or educiere means to lead out. So when you have training and development and tools, you have effective coaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. Now, you mentioned a bit ago there about that there tends to be a gap between what the trainer thinks their job is and perhaps what the client might expect or hope to get from the training. And I can agree. I've witnessed that on many an occasion. Why do you think that exists? Why do you think trainers sometimes don't understand what it is that the client really wants from them as a coach?
Well, because they don't ask.
So you think it's a communication problem?
Yeah, we're not trained typically to ask questions. We're not trained to lead people to their own conclusions. We talk about leadership quite a bit, right? Like we're all leaders, and leadership is not about how many followers you have on Instagram. It's not about your title, and it's not about what level of authority you hold. If you're going to talk about leadership, again, I think semantics are everything, because if you don't exist within the domain of semantics, you don't build a foundation, which is a building from point or a stepping off point into a conversation. So a lot of times you get into these dialogues and debates that spiral into arguments where you don't even know what you're arguing about. In my mind, is this the perfect definition for leadership? No, and it doesn't have to be your definition or anybody else's definition who's listening to this or watching this, but let's use it as a working definition. Leaders are people who can imagine a future that would not exist otherwise. Mm-hmm. And I know that's really weird language because it deals with intervention and redirection. So if I'm on a train and I'm traveling from south up to north, but, I really want to go west. At some point, that conductor has to pull the right levers to shift that track from northbound to westbound. Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm just going along on that train ride and I get on south and I'm going north and I just arrive north, can that conductor take any credit for getting me to where I want to go? No, because I would have gotten there anyway. Somebody walks in and they have type 2 adrenal fatigue and they're struggling. They're struggling not just with their appearance, they're struggling physically, emotionally, cognitively. If they keep going the way they're going, are they going to arrive at a pretty predictable destination? Well, yeah. So we need to help them select certain behaviors that help them to change course. But before you could do that, you have to ask which behaviors. Well, that depends on where do you want to go. So leaders help clients and help individuals, doesn't matter what type of group it is, identify a future that would not have existed otherwise. The second component is strategy. And strategy does not necessarily mean complexity. Very often, what's even more important is predictability and scalability, reproducibility. But you need strategy. And the third component is leaders communicate with people in a way that galvanizes individuals and directs action. They need to do something if they're going to be something. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So, we talk about leadership. It is understanding where we're going, strategically, how do we get there, and inspiring or compelling people to take action to bridge that gap between where they want to be and where they are now. So if that's the definition of leadership, we're not trained in leadership in this industry. Not well anyway. What we're trained in is didactic instruction. I'm the authority. I know your problem, and your problem is pretty much superficial, right? So you want to get here. So I'm going to give you instructions. And if you follow them, you'll get there. If you don't follow them, well, you must not have wanted it badly enough. You must lack discipline, willpower, or whatever attribute we assign to success that we assume they lack, without truly understanding who that individual is and what motivates them.
Mm-hmm. I can see where you're going. So do you think then that this traditional or sometimes common route of managing and instructing clients in fitness tends to be the personal trainer rather than the personal coach? Because as you've been talking about leadership there, it sounded very much like a great start to a coaching model that might be more effective than just here, I'm the person telling you how to train and how to physically change your body.
Well, yeah, I'm optimistic, Ben, about the coaching model. Now, it's almost like when Pine and Gilmore in the year 2000, wow, that's such a long time ago now, wrote The Experience Economy. And then companies said, hey, we're all about experiences right now. But they never identified what an experience was. They never identified how their customer framed experiences. They just started using the word experience a lot more, but basically did the same stuff that they had always done with a new word for it. So there is that where coaching gets diluted, but the true sense of coaching, I think, is more powerful because we don't abandon any of the tools and resources we utilized in the training model. We include them and then we go beyond them. But the thing about coaching is it helps us identify who we are and who we are not. And I think that when we become the source of change, we run into problems because people do not operate that way. I mean, if I had a conversation with Joseph Ledoux, he is one of the foremost neuroscientists in the world. And he said, the things with trainers is if you wanted to work a muscle, you would need to know a little bit about the anatomy of that muscle because structure dictates function. Very good. Pretty perceptive coming from a neuroscientist on what trainers would need to do on a very fundamental level. He said, yeah, you got to kind of look at the brain and human behavior the same way. Look at the structure. Look at the structure, the anatomy of the brain. Then from that, we could work back, we understand brain function and understand a little bit about how people make decisions. Why do people operate the way they do? And the more we become empirically based, or at the very least empirically led, I think the more promise and more encouraging results will start to emanate for our clients first and for ourselves, of course, second.
No, that makes a lot of logical sense, doesn't it? To understand how people think, to how they function, to how what motivates change. Yeah, understanding the nervous system and the brain is going to be a big part of that, as well as emotional drive and things along those lines, for sure. Now, you have a few concepts. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. You could say, understand the human being that resides in the human body you're training. A lot of people separate the human being from the human body, and that's where things get messy. I don't mean literally. That would definitely be very messy. But I mean metaphorically as well. You don't simply train a body. You train a human that's residing inside of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to truly bring about change that somebody wants to do, you've got to get inside and affect the way they think and feel and are driven by their motivations, for sure. Now, you talk about a number of concepts, and there's a few that, if you don't mind, I'd just like to pick on, because I think if we pull some of these ideas out, it might help some of the listeners change their own thoughts about how they might manage their clients moving forward. Now, one of the concepts I've heard you talk about a lot over the years is this idea of cognitive dissonance. Could you define what we mean by the term cognitive dissonance?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you the definition, and then I'll explain it in English. And cognitive dissonance that term was coined by psychologist Leon Festinger when he noticed that his patients seemed to struggle when they held two conflicting viewpoints in mind. And they still, despite that, tried to function. And a good example of this there's a lot of examples. Okay, career criminals, just to keep this light and peppy. Mimi Silbert is a psychologist, and decades ago, she was operating in the San Francisco Bay Area. And the question she asked herself is, why are so few prisoners successfully rehabilitated if rehabilitation is truly the intention of a prison and not simply retribution and punishment? Mm-hmm. Interesting question. So she started interviewing other psychologists, and they said, well, basically people who are in and out of prison, talk about an overarching assumption coming from seemingly intelligent people. The reason why people go in and out of prison, there aren't any socioeconomic variables or any other variables in their external world that are as prevalent as a major issue in the internal world, which is they are born psychopaths. Right. Or through trauma, they become sociopaths, and there's not much you could do with them. They're beyond rehabilitation. And she thought to herself, statistically, that doesn't even make sense. Obviously, there are some people who are psychopaths, sociopaths, and they're beyond rehabilitation. It's the structure of their brain itself. But it doesn't make sense that high number of people would receive that diagnosis. I don't believe that. So she set the Delancey Street program, and what she basically did is interviewed thousands of career criminals and identified two fundamental beliefs that they had. Number one was, look out for number one. And you know what? That seems like a reasonable belief, because if you're going to be a career criminal and you're empathetic and you're looking out for everybody else's well-being, you're not going to be a very successful career criminal. Yeah, and other career criminals won't respect you, and they'll kind of take the piss, and rightfully so. Mm-hmm. Maybe nursing is more for you. The second belief seemed to be in contradiction of the first belief, and that is, if you ever get caught, whatever you do, don't you ever rat. So she creates this program that she has to get a lot of funding and struggle, because the city would not fund it. Like, this is a useless program, but we'll give it a shot. And you would have somebody in front of the judge and say, like, third offense, and it's like, Ben, I'm just using your name as a placeholder, not suggesting anything. We're going to send you away, Ben. We don't know what to do with you. You're going away for 20 years. You've really stuffed yourself up big this time, but we do have this other program. You go into this house in San Francisco. Instantly, yeah, tell me more about this house. It sounds fantastic. And we warn you, we'll put you in this program, Ben, but any violations, and you're going away. You're serving your full 20 years. And your time at Delancey Street doesn't count. You start from day 1 through 20 when we send you to prison. So there's a lot of incentive here. And the first thing that they would do is, let's say you're in the program for 4 days, and I come in on day 2. Nobody is ever going to ask you how you're doing again, Ben. They're going to say, how's your crew doing, Ben? Here's Bobby. Bobby's been here for 2 days. You're like, I've not even been here a week. Yeah, but you have twice the seniority. You better look out for Bobby, because if Bobby struggles or if he screws up, we send you to prison. Wait a minute. What? That's not fair. Well, it's not fair, but it's the rules. Mm-hmm. So now you've got to start looking out for everybody else other than you. Second thing is, if you see anybody, especially somebody in your crew, violate any rule, no matter how seemingly insignificant, you must go to the house supervisor and rat them out. Now, after a couple of months dealing with this and living in this environment, you have to start to question whether or not you are a traitor to everything that you've believed in your whole life, or you have to start to think, I've been behaving in this way. What if the rules that I had been following, what if everything I believed in and the certain course of action I've been following is the reason for most of my problems in life in the first place? Mm-hmm. What if these rules are actually better? Because the more you engage in those behaviors, cognitive dissonance creates this striving for consistency between what you have believed, said, and done in the past and what you will do in the present and the future. Mm-hmm. So you start to alter your belief because you have first altered your behaviors. All and right. In doing so, you resolve, these people resolve the incongruencies that cause them emotional distress. And a very large percentage of these people go on to be managers of 5-star restaurants, hotels, maitre d's, not only productive, but truly caring, empathetic people contributing to their society, which is not congruent with the diagnosis of socio or psychopath. Mm-hmm. That's a good, that's cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I really like that, particularly the bit where you were talking there about that people's actions, when they actually do things and they do them consistently over time, that begins to change their motivation and their behaviors and even the beliefs that they had in the past. So it's the action that varies the belief, not I have to believe something before I'm willing to act, which I think is what most people have as their baseline.
If they believe that they're selecting those behaviors autonomously, and those behaviors are not imposed upon them. Mm-hmm. So getting someone to select one simple habit that they choose. I mean, you could give them variables to choose from. You don't have to have them come up with it on their own. But if they select that habit and how they're going to implement it and how they seek support for it and what their intrinsic reward is going to be when they adhere to it, as well as what are they going to do when they screw up, right? What could go wrong? And what does that mean and how you can get back on track? And then you get that person, as they increase in self-efficacy, to stack other habits on top of that. Habit stacking is one of the most powerful tools for long-term transformation because it not only implements a habit that becomes hardwired, but it also alters your self-concept and a word that I'm very fond of, I'll use it frequently, self-efficacy, which is your inward belief in your ability to initiate and perpetuate decisions and behaviors that are congruent with what you want.
Mm-hmm. You sort of said something there, which I find myself going, yeah, I completely agree with that idea of giving the power to the individual to choose the behaviors that they believe they can be successful in. Of course, you can suggest various options and discuss options, but and it leads us quite nicely into the next point, because what I basically did there was agree with something that I also have a confirmation bias of. And so that it leads us into this idea of what is confirmation bias. This is usually something I've come across in the past that is seen as a hurdle that needs to be overcome when someone's performing scientific research to ensure that research ends up with results that are not driven by the researcher's own beliefs. Now, this, of course, could potentially affect trainers and people in the fitness industry. If I give you an example, Bobby, one of the ways I've seen this particular thing the most is probably in the world of nutrition. And people start to align themselves to particular types of nutritional dieting or something like that. And then they only ever see the nutritional advice that supports their current ideas as being the right advice. And then you get these real battles going on. So what exactly is this concept of confirmation bias? And does it only affect the client, or does it also only affect the trainer, or is it a bit of a problem of both?
Well, you can't affect one without affecting the other. I mean, confirmation bias is basically starting your research with a conclusion, a predetermined conclusion that you're emotionally attached to, and then seeking out only evidence that supports your beliefs and dismissing or ignoring any evidence that contradicts it. So yeah, that can be problematic. And it's hard to resolve a confirmation bias because very often, just like our clients have emotional attachments to things that support their identity, which if you get into like the hierarchy of human needs, Maslow's hierarchy, identity is almost synonymous with safety. Oh, it's really? Our sense of who we are, right? And it transcends that basic human need to also belonging. And it can also create a level of significance. So identity crosses at least 3 out of the 5 major human needs that we all have. And Maslow's hierarchy is imperfect, but it's a good working model. So you really have to find other means to be certain, to belong, and to be significant other than an attachment to identity. And all I mean by identity is it's the level of affinity we have with some ideology, something, someone, or some group. And the stronger that affinity, the harder it is to operate outside of our identity.
Yeah. So for example, just for the benefit of the listeners, if somebody might identify themselves as a CrossFitter, and therefore that's the type of training I do, that's the type of people I train, or they might identify themselves as I'm a low carb expert. Those are things that there's very strong sort of beliefs and associations and behaviors with both of those different activities. And if you've invested in that over a number of years, it can be quite difficult, can it, Bobby, to step away and to try and do something different?
Yeah. And if I identify, and, I've encountered this with a lot of different trainers where, I practice method X. Mm-hmm. Therefore, if I have a client that doesn't do method X, I don't take that client on, or I fire them. And that's interesting. So you shove clients forcibly into a methodology rather than use a methodology to serve your clients. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a carpenter and I'm like, well, I love using a hammer, and that's the only tool I use. So if this job requires anything other than a hammer, I can't take you on as my client. That's madness. Mm-hmm. I think when you start to ask yourself, who am I? Who am I really, and who do I want to be? And this takes me into something that I haven't talked about in a while, but it's one of the most profound things that I've learned, and was from a CEO that I worked very closely with a relatively short period of time ago. And it's the concept of originating intention. And originating intention is something, it's an experience, it's a revelation, it's an insight that you've had in your life that has added enormous value and enrichment to your world and who you are, so much so that you find it sacred and you want it for everyone without condition. Mm-hmm. Not if they think like me, or if they look like me, or if they do what without condition. Wow. And when you establish clarity on originating intention, it helps you formulate an identity around that. So when you get clear on originating intention, it kind of nullifies and alleviates, if not eliminates, a lot of the cognitive biases, because there's something that is bigger than that is far more deeper and significant. For example, my originating intention is you can live your truth and be free to play. And I'm not going to go into that, but I think when you take a look at invention, creation, anything that enriches our lives scientifically, artistically, cognitively, it's the result of adults who have ferociously been committed to focused attention and adult play. Mm-hmm. Adult play, that sounds a little bit naughty. That's not what I mean. But like Steve Jobs, adult play. Elon Musk, Richard Branson. I'm just throwing out 3 names at the top of my head. There's a lot of other people that deserve to be on that list. Mm-hmm. But if you think about how much these people have transformed our world and how committed and hardworking they've been mm-hmm. in the domain of play and employed innovation and creativity, I also think, and this is my bias, that when you're that committed to learning and creation for something that you value and others value as well, that's the key to happiness and fulfillment. But in order to do that, you have to live your truth and not be bothered by the convention's demands of other people that distract you from it. So when I have a client, the space I hold for them is you can live your truth and be free to play. And wellness is how we free ourselves and give ourselves the physical, emotional, and mental capacity to pursue that which is most meaningful to us, to the point where we get absorbed by it and lost in it, which mm-hmm. is the whole point of play. It's that focus, and it's that socialization, that integration with other human beings or other mammals. We can extend it a little bit further. So mm-hmm. that's my highest want for people in front of me. So if I happen to love CrossFit, it doesn't become about CrossFit. I could do CrossFit, but it might not be appropriate for everyone else. And that's okay, because CrossFit is something I do. It's not the core of who I am. My originating intention is at the core of who I am. If I happen to be on a keto type of program, that's great. That doesn't mean I have to advocate that for everybody else, because a lot of times we find out what's best for other people, not through advocacy, but through focused inquiry. So that's okay. I could train a vegan. I mean, there's so many fights, isn't there? Like
there
between
is, yeah,
keto,
sure.
paleos, vegans. I mean, if you leave a paleo and a vegan alone in the same room, the paleo will likely eat the vegan. I'm serious.
Probably. Now, I really like what you said there, because I think that's so powerful, is that just because we adopt certain habits, or there's things that we do, as you said there, it doesn't mean that that's who we are, and it doesn't mean that that's what we have to tell all of our clients to do. You know, one of the concepts or ideas that I've always taught to students when I've worked in fitness education is this idea that personal training is about making the training personal to the individual, not personal to the trainer. Even though the name might suggest that, it's not about, this is my training method, you must do it. It's about finding out what that person needs to achieve their results, which is kind of what you've been talking about there with this coaching leadership model thing.
Well, there's a principle in coaching that basically says, listen until I disappear. Because until I disappear, I cannot create safety for you or me to truly not only hear you and what you say, but to know what you mean by what it is you say.
I like
and there might be some things that I've gotten from my own life that might help other people. But as coaches, we can never interject our autobiography into another person's life story to where we eclipse their role as protagonist and hero in their own life. We're the guide, not the hero. And that's a very important role. So when you identify with a method or a thing, it's going to be a hard road ahead. When you identify with an originating intention, what's sacred for you and what you want for that client, respecting their uniqueness, their autonomy, and their sense of humanness and imperfection, you're not in a position where you can lead them, because that's the only thing that creates long-term adherence. I believe leading them to their own conclusions and behaviors that allow them to be the best version of themselves, defined by themselves.
Excellent. I really like that. We're kind of coming close on time. We've probably got about 2 minutes left here, Bobby, but I'm going to try and lever in 2 questions, okay? So see if we can get through these kind of quick. The second last question I want to ask is there a final key practice that you would like to talk about that we haven't done so far that you might that you believe underpins effective coaching? So a key practice that underpins coaching that we haven't yet talked about.
Yes.
Go for it. Tell us.
Oh, we have time to expand.
Yeah, go. Okay, if you can do it in about 30 seconds or so, that would be great.
Motivational interviewing. Now, I can't talk much about it because we're running out of time, but motivational interviewing is based on basically 4 presuppositions, 4 domains rather. And the 4 pillars or domains of motivational interviewing are: 1, using inquiry to create discrepancies between where somebody is and where they want to be.
Good.
Number 2, it's establishing very small wins and very small behaviors in order to elevate self-efficacy, which I defined before. So it's great discrepancies, self-efficacy. It's seeing resistance a normal part of the process, because a lot of times when people say one thing but do another, it's not because they lack discipline, willpower, they're weak. None of that has a lot of data or literature to support it. It's because they want 2 things that are in opposition with one another. Like when I was 5, I wanted a pet kitten, but I also wanted a hawk. That could be problematic. So the normal part of resolving ambivalence is resistance. Roll with that resistance. Don't take it as an affront to your authority and fight. And the 4th component is empathy, which is the ability, the necessity to project yourself into the emotions, situations, feelings of the other person, not sympathy, where you simply feel bad for someone and see them as a disempowered victim. So it's empathy, self-efficacy, it's creating discrepancy and rolling with resistance.
Excellent. I totally agree. Motivational interviewing is such a powerful tool, and listeners, you can certainly go and do some searching on the internet on motivational interviewing. There's plenty of information to read, but yeah, Bobby, you explained it very well there. So last question, all right? If you were able to go back and speak to newly qualified personal trainer, young Bobby Cappuccio, all right, just as he embarked on his journey, is there any short snippet of advice you would offer him at that point as a new personal trainer?
Yes, mate, if you can do anything else for a living, anything at all. No. Basically what I said earlier. You will be successful, and that's a vague term, fulfilled to the degree that you focus on the human being as much as the human body.
Yeah, I think that's great final advice. It really is.
And the adjunct to that is, in that quest, do not be distracted by your need to gain approval from other people who have an agenda.
Excellent words to finish this interview on, Bobby. It's been a fascinating discussion. We've covered so much. It would be wonderful perhaps at some point in the future we could come back and delve into some more of this, but really appreciate your time. And of course, for the listeners, on the show notes for this on our website, you're going to find all the various ways to connect with Bobby and a little bit more about some of the topics that we've discussed during this particular episode. So Bobby, thank you so much for your time. It's been such a
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share via social media. You can also rate the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. If you'd like to know more about us, then check out our range of online courses at www.nordicfitnesseducation.com.